Conflict is it's a part of life, right? From tiny arguments over what to watch next, all the way up to huge company-defining disagreements. But figuring out how to solve them fairly and efficiently, well, that's a whole other ballgame. So today, let's open up the toolkit and see exactly what our options are for getting to a good resolution.
Oh man, we have all been there. A simple disagreement just starts to spiral, and all you can think is, I wish I could just hit undo. Well, it turns out there are actual, structured ways to do something kind of like that, to find a solution without torturing relationships or just making everything worse.
When you think of a serious dispute, this is probably what pops into your head, right? A courtroom. It's formal, it's high stakes, but you know what else it is? It's incredibly expensive, it takes forever, and it's all out in the public eye. So, what if there were other ways?
And that is exactly what we're talking about today. It's called Alternative Dispute Resolution, or ADR for short. And you should really think of it as a whole menu of options for solving problems, all designed with one big goal in mind: staying out of court.
Okay, so we're going to start with the most basic, most fundamental tool in that whole ADR toolkit. It's something every single one of us does pretty much every day, even if we don't call it this. We're talking about negotiation.
So, what is it really? Well, negotiation is just the process of two or more people trying to reach an agreement together. And here's the absolute key. There's no outside party involved, no referee, no judge. It is just the people in the dispute trying to work it out face to face. Now, before you even start talking, you have to ask yourself a crucial question. What do I actually want here? Are you laser-focused on the outcome? You just want to get a specific thing? Or is the relationship the most important part? You need to work with this person again tomorrow. Your answer completely changes your strategy.
And that leads to two totally different ways of thinking. The win-lose approach sees the problem as a fixed pie. Any slice you get is a slice I can't have. It's a zero-sum game. But the win-win approach is different. It asks, hey, wait a minute, can we work together to actually make this pie bigger so there's more for both of us?
Okay, this is so fascinating. This chart maps out our default styles. For example, if you care a lot about your own goals but not so much about the other person's, you're down here in the forcing style. But if you care deeply about both, now you're collaborating. And if you couldn't care less about either, well, you're probably just avoiding the whole thing. Knowing where you tend to land and where the other person is a huge, huge advantage.
But what happens when talking it out just isn't working? You're at a stalemate. Well, that's when you climb one rung up the ADR ladder. You bring in a guide, and that's called mediation.
So mediation brings a new person into the room, a neutral third party. But, and this is so important, the mediator is not a judge. It is not their job to decide who's right or who's wrong. Their one and only purpose is to help the conversation along and guide the two parties to find their own solution.
And it isn't just a free-for-all chat. It's a very clear process. It starts with everyone giving their side, then they discuss it together. But step 4, the private caucus, that's kind of the secret sauce. That's where the mediator takes each person aside one-on-one. In that private chat, people can be totally honest about what they really want, which helps the mediator find creative solutions that nobody saw before.
So why bother? Is it worth it? Well, yeah, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. In this one case, Chevron used its own internal mediation program for about $25,000. The alternative? Going to court, which was estimated to cost them $2.5 million. I mean, that is just a staggering difference. And it's not just about the money. Mediation has 3 other massive benefits. First, confidentiality. Unlike court, which is public, what happens in mediation stays in mediation. Second, creativity. You can agree to solutions that a judge could literally never order. And third, control. This is huge. You, the parties, are still in the driver's seat. You get to decide the final outcome, not some stranger in a row. And speaking of creativity, get a load of this. People are actually studying canine-assisted mediation. The thinking is that just having a calm, friendly therapy animal in the room literally lowers people's stress levels, making them more open to compromise. It's a pretty wild and very human-centered way of looking at problem solving. Okay, but what if even a guided conversation doesn't cut it? You need someone to just make a decision, to make the call. Well, that brings us to the most formal, most decisive step in the ADR process before you end up in an actual courthouse. This is arbitration. Arbitration is basically like a private trial. You have a neutral person, the arbitrator, but here they're acting like a judge. They'll listen to arguments, they'll look at the evidence, and then they make a binding decision, which is called an award.
Now, here's a really critical fork in the road. In binding arbitration, whatever the arbitrator decides is final. It's legally enforceable. Game over. But in non-binding arbitration, the decision is more like a very strong suggestion. It's an expert opinion that can help push the parties toward a compromise they reach on their own.
You can also get pretty creative with the rules. Take something called baseball arbitration. It's brilliant. Each side writes down their final offer, their bottom line. The arbitrator has to pick one or the other. They can't meet in the middle. And what this does is it forces both sides to be as reasonable as possible from the get-go.
And don't think this is some obscure process. Arbitration is happening all the time in really high-stakes fields. We're talking major labor union contracts, massive business deals gone wrong, and super complex fights over who owns a patent or a trademark.
So there we have it. Negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. 3 totally different tools for 3 different situations. Let's just put them side by side so we can see how they stack up. This right here, this chart, is the whole thing in a nutshell. Look at the top row. Who decides? In negotiation and mediation, it's the parties themselves. But in arbitration, the power shifts to the arbitrator. You can see the process moves from super informal to guided, all the way to something that looks like a trial. And the outcome goes from a mutual agreement to a final binding decision.
So why does any of this matter to you in your day-to-day life? Because of this phrase right here, forced arbitration clauses. Tons of companies bake these right into the fine print of their terms of service. When you agree, you might actually be giving up your right to ever sue that company in a public court.
And that really leaves us with one last very important question. These tools can be incredibly useful, but how they're used has very real consequences for all of us. So the next time you're about to check that box, it's worth taking a second to ask yourself, when I click I agree, what am I really agreeing to?